It's true that it's slow innovation. It's true that the cost to have this regulation is a big one. I've read somewhere that 1 to 2% of the revenue of a company is for those regulation. But on the long run, it's a good thing to harmonize standards, which help customers have the same user experience, because we don't want to have different user experience as an end user. I don't want to be able to switch from different AIs and be overwhelmed. So it helps actually boost innovation once we go beyond that learning curve.
Welcome to AI Catch Up, the podcast catching up with the tech products that matter in the AI era.
Hi everyone, welcome to the AI Catch Up podcast. Together, we are decoding the real journeys behind AI products. Today, I'm joined by Amine Ait El Harraj, Practice Manager for Data and AIML at Reply. He has previously been transforming enterprise architectures, with cutting their costs up to 80%. He has also been building the lead generation platform, and currently he's implementing responsible AI in the companies. Amine, welcome to the show.
Lena, thanks for having me.
You have been working on crash reporting solutions at Ubisoft. Then you have been the colleague of mine at AWS and you worked on solutions architectures. And now you are leading AIML practice in Reply. What I would be very curious about, based on the different career stations that you have passed through, what would you recommend when it comes to implementing responsible AI? What frameworks do really work? And how to make it happen also without the whole crowd of lawyers that can support you?
It's a good question, actually, Elena. And to be fair, responsible AI, it's something that has spawned like in the last 2, 3, 4 years at most. Back then, in 10 years, it was more about what we call now weak AI or narrow AI that is dedicated for specific tasks. So, for instance, spam filtering, it was kind of an AI, but it was not an intelligent one. That's what we call weak AI. And the responsible AI wasn't yet a subject there. So, when we started data engineering or data testing for gaming, like in Ubisoft, for instance, or for customers that want to build their data tools, they were definitely using AI models to do that. So you had all that kind of machine learning models that do the prediction, do the recommendation, and so on. But those are kind of weak AI, and responsible AI was not really a subject back then. We still had some issues related to ability, like my model, if it predicts a recommendation or have a recommendation, I need to know why this model is that predicted that way. But the classical ML, it was kind of deterministic. I have inputs, features, I get my output, I put a model. It was kind of a mathematical approach to get the answers. With the responsible AI and emergence of what we call general purpose AI, such as ChatGPT or Mistral or others, we are getting into a black box approach where models give a non-deterministic answer. So, for instance, ChatGPT, if you put the same question 2 times, you may get 2 different answers. And this is why we are talking about responsible AI. So, first of all, I think that the audience are quite interested in what is the responsible AI. So, there is a definition of responsible AI in the EU AI Act or using other compliance documents, but responsible AI in a nutshell can be simulated to an AI, an artificial intelligence system that is ethical, fair, transparent, and accountable, plus other dimensions that are related to controllability, fairness, and transparency. But the main ones are related to the fact that it is reliable and safe, that is accountable, and that is transparent. So when an AI answers, I need to know why it get this answer. So that's why we talk about chain of thoughts. That's why we are starting to talk about observability of the models. So the weights that has been used in those answers, and as well as accountability. And it's really important to know if a wrong answer has been shared, who is accountable for it? Is it the developers of the AI or the actual users of the AI? If we're talking about fairness and inclusiveness, I need to be sure if my model has been biased by any specific users or has been trained for a specific demographic or as such. This is why a responsible AI has been more predominant and more important as we are going into more what we call general purpose AI. And then we are talking about autonomous AI, that's another subject, but it is getting more and more interesting into how I deploy a model, and I'm sure that is not harmful for my users. And the funny thing about responsible AI and AI overall, it's not a subject that is related to to small customers or big companies? It is something that has been influenced by small and big companies. So, for instance, Amazon, when they launched their Amazon Q back then in 2023, when it got launched, it has some issues with hallucinations. So it got shut down and it got then released again, which means it may work for big companies as well as small companies. So it's something that is impacted by all companies as long as they are starting to use AI ML or generative AI, they will hit those kind of vulnerabilities that is linked to those general purpose AI.
And now that we are touching upon hallucinations, we are touching upon EU AI Act, we are thinking about very practical things that generally will emerge if you're working with, as you're mentioning, not narrow AI or general purpose AI. If I'm creating a product and I'm also thinking about launching it in Europe as well, what would you say are the things that I should take into account and in what stages? Which dimension would you be considering as the most important ones when I am on the stage of validating my idea and bringing it to my first users? And which one would come afterwards?
So that's actually a tricky one because there's 6 dimensions and you cannot possibly cover 100% over those dimensions. In a nutshell, there is 6. There is fairness and inclusiveness, reliability and safety, transparency, privacy and security, accountability, and controllability. The fact that I can control my model in a certain way to answer specific questions. So those are the main dimensions of responsible AI. As in a life, there is a trade-off you need to do. Which one would take more predominance? It depends on the industry, on the use case. So for instance, if you are dealing with banking, assurance, they will have other priorities than supply chain, manufacturing, and media. Before actually touching upon the dimension of responsible AI, users of Gen AI, generative AI, or general purpose AI need to understand the actual vulnerabilities of those models. Mainly, there is, I would say, 4 main big subjects of vulnerabilities. We spoke about hallucination and security risks is like when we have an unexpected and harmful output, such as racist remarks or insults. We have the fact that is the issue related to irrelevant content. So my model, sometimes if you have tested GPT when it started, the answers seems correct, but they are not actually. So it seems that the actual answer is a correct one. It's really well written and so on, but the actual information is not the correct one. And the last vulnerability that is really troublesome for enterprises mainly is data leakage. And that goes into hallucination as well. So I don't want my model to share details on my company or on my employees, especially if you link it with GDPR. So I don't want to share any personal data. So if, say, I have an HR bot, I don't want to have access to the email or to the salary or to the phone number of another collaborator through that chatbot. So those are the main vulnerabilities. So there's others, lack of common sense, validation error, bias and fairness. But those vulnerabilities are what we need to start with when we do with our use case, because we will not be able to hit 100% on all those vulnerabilities, because technically we can, but it doesn't make sense because there's a lot of money there. You need to put a stream specific for each one, and the fact that if you overstretch one, you may miss on the other dimension. So you need to prioritize the vulnerabilities that you have. So for instance, if you are dealing with a bot that is related to healthcare, hallucination is one of the most utmost important vulnerabilities that we want to cover, rather than validation errors or relevant content, maybe. But if someone asks me about about a disease, I need to give appropriate and proper answers rather than hallucinate on a wrong answer. And once I get my vulnerabilities sorted out and prioritized, I will be able to match them to my responsible AI dimensions. So for instance, for vulnerabilities, in order to be sure that I don't hallucinate, I need to have a proper track of the accountability, of transparency, as well as reliability and safety. So by doing that kind of metrics, you have your vulnerabilities, you match them with the dimensions, you will be able to put priority again on those dimensions of responsible AI. And the funny thing is that the UE AI Act works on the same way because they are based on risk-based approach. So they started with the things that are most important, and then they started to give more freedom to some kind of bots, and they finished with the level 1 that is minimal risks, that has no regulation, such as spam filters and so on. So it's kind of the same thing, the same approach that they followed with the.
So, to have the matrix of risks that are inherent within LLMs and general purpose AI, and then mapping it to the dimensions to observe, and then prioritizing dimensions based on that. I think that is already giving the good mind flow in a way when it comes to how to approach this. What I'm also asking myself is how actually companies right now stick to EU AI Act, and what do they do, well, in case actually something happens. So we can imagine that we are building all the possible guardrails within all the dimensions, but things can still go wrong. We are speaking about non-deterministic nature of AI, and what happens then?
Well, what happens is that sometimes you end up with companies that get bankrupt because they fail to validate and to secure the users' data. You may end up with some big issues with the data leakage within the company and so on. So it has a big impact on a company trust for their users. So if we're talking about the EU AI Act, in this case, it is actually for me quite an important step to follow that EU AI Act, and it's really quite an important step towards regulation of the AIs. And just one thing that I want to pinpoint here is that many folks think that AI EU Act came following ChatGPT release, which is not the case. So the Commission actually originally proposed the EU AI Act back in 2021, before the release of ChatGPT. But it was mainly focused on artificial narrow intelligence. So as mentioned, only weak AI, not general purpose AI. Funny thing, in 2022 November, I believe, ChatGPT has been released, which was initially out of scope, but all the hype that was around it, the different usage of it, so that many users has misused it and so on, it definitely pushed pressure on the Commission to put it into the EU AI Act. And this is why a whole new article has been added into the EU AI Act that would take general purpose AI into the scope. And for European models and companies that use AI in the act, they are called deployers or developers. They have some important regulation and metrics to follow in order to release their product in Europe. The good thing is that the major responsibility fall upon the developers, or what we call the foundation models. So in this case, that would be Anthropic, OpenAI, Mistral. They are the one that take the most of the responsibility in the UI Act, which means that when a developer, say OpenAI, would like to release a ChatGPT 5, in instance, and want to release it in the EU market, they will need to follow a couple of steps and a couple of regulation to make it used by Europeans. And the deployers, that are the end customers, the companies, will be able to reuse what OpenAI has released as technical documentation summary statement in order to prove that their chatbot is compliant with the UE regulation. Without that UE AI Act, it would again back into accountability. We wouldn't have that accountability in scope. If there is an issue with the chatbot, the European enterprise would say, hey, it's Anthropic the issue, or it's OpenAI the issue, it's not our problem, and vice versa. But with having that framework that is the UAI Act, we are clear who should do what, and at what point, if there is an issue, who will pay the fees and who will be accountable of that issue.
Actually, the common idea that the EU AI Act is very much stopping the innovation in the EU might in the long term be very helpful to companies that take things into account that, well, young companies might be skipping for the reasons they want to be fast. But at the same time, those mistakes can lead to them failing, while the framework might provide the mechanism to think about the scenarios that are likely to happen. And that is a rather new idea to me that I haven't previously thought about. But you have also had your own founder experience with your Synchronicity, and that was also the platform that has scaled very strongly. And the question is whether, from your founder perspective and from the perspective of the person who understands how to bring products to the market, whether you feel that indeed the AI Act and, well, even GDPR is something that is hindering the entrance to the market or anyhow helpful, and I'm missing something.
So that's actually a good, really good question, especially that I'm based in France, and we just had the AI Action Paris Summit, and there is a actual debate right now regarding France still in the race, is behind the schedule and so on, and if the AI Act is helping or not. And actually, in my opinion, the AI Act has two main benefits. So first of all, it's keeping us safe, which is good. So for someone that is not technical, knows that ChatGPT is safe, it will not propose something that is harmful for that user. And the second thing is that is actually harmonizing standards, which is really good. So for instance, if I'm a new company and I wanted to start using ChatGPT or using Anthropic or using another or Mistral, for instance, I know that they all align and they all accepted specific regulation for the European market. They know that they need to follow a specific standards. So in my case, I will not have to twist my models, my multi-agent workflow for specific provider, but I know that they will all follow the same thing. So which, first of all, as a startup developer, you need to have, you cannot hit all the markets, so you need to focus. And the fact that it's standardized, it will be able to scale much fast. So if you are, for instance, if we take the example of startup that started with Mistral, if tomorrow they want to switch to ChatGPT, it's going to be way easier if it's not standardized. So this is some quite key benefits of that EU AI Act. It's true that it's slow innovation. It's true that the cost to have this regulation is quite a big one. I've read somewhere that 1 to 2% of the revenue of a company is for those regulations. So for big companies, maybe it's not a big deal, but for SMBs and small companies, it's something that is impactful. But on the long run, I think that it's a good thing to harmonize standards, which help customers and users as well have the same user experience, because we don't want to have different user experience as an end user. I don't want to be able to switch from different AIs and be overwhelmed. So this is actually a good thing, and it helps actually boost innovation once we go beyond that learning curve, I would say.
Very interesting, especially since, well, being in safer environments is something that clearly arises to me when it comes to responsible AI, but standardization is not something that I have had in mind. And well, it does make sense that then for me, it can be easier to switch when it comes to the provider. At the same time, for the providers themselves, it's definitely tricky
Yeah,
because they should comply and, well, they should
definitely.
put strong investment into that. And well, in Germany, there is nothing like Mistral, right?
Well, maybe in short future, who knows? But if I may add, there is actually something that I want to share, because I'm seeing a lot of LinkedIn posts, and many customers are asking me, how should I choose my model and how should I operate my model, or what model should I use? And the funny thing is that when I start talking with them, they say, hey, I did benchmark on A, B, C. This one is better in the code. This one is better in the latency. And at some point, I'm saying this benchmark will be outdated as fast as tomorrow, because tomorrow you will have a new model, you will not be able to benchmark it again. So starting with a benchmark as is, it's a good thing, but it shouldn't be the decision pillar for you. So it should be actually the use case that you are driving, how to pivot around different models that you choose. And that's why standardization again is important. The fact that, as you can see, DeepSeek, which is actually really good, they just copy it what the OpenAI API, and which make it compatible. Users and developers was able to switch from OpenAI to DeepSeek and so on. So that kind of thing is what is important. Never start with the model benchmark, but always with the use case. And this is why we start to see some patterns such as multi-agents. So multi-agent, the fact that you can pick the agent that you want, break down the cost, but as well give more freedom and agility in choosing the model. So that's really the main advice I would give to new users or to existing ones on the GenAI field.
You have at once looked into total cost of ownership of the whole IT stack for the company. When it comes to AI and data workloads, would you say that there are certain three clear patterns that you can see that are very, very often overlooked when it comes to cost optimization, when it comes potentially to reducing costs. Let's share the secrets with the listeners of the podcast.
That's actually a good one, and it's actually a question that is always valid even from data engineering back there with Hortonworks or Data Lake on-prem, but as well on the cloud providers, data engineers, the lakehouse then, and then we move to artificial intelligence with or AI and ML models. So when talking about the FinOps, there is mainly two things that came in my mind. Of course, we need to follow the best practices of each field. So data analytics has its best practices, so partitioning and so on, all that technical stuff. You need to be sure about the pricing model of the models that you use. For instance, if you are on the cloud provider, each time start by checking the pricing model of the services that you use and how they interact with your architecture. And second is how you put all that into one solution, because that's why we start to talk about DevOps, MLOps, DevSecOps. The thing is, I want to be sure that my solution is scalable, but with actual read data, I don't want to replicate the production account or production environment with my dev environment. So it's really important to understand what my models are trained on and try to mimic at most the different environment in my DevOps chain so that I don't pay more than I should. That is really important because if you do not mimic the production environment when you deploy your solution or your architecture and you start with dummy data, you may have a false confidence on your solution. So it may work on dev, but once you hit the real world with the real use case data, it will work differently. So by doing a passive active, but not having the full data, but that's what we call, if you remember when we started talking about data mesh and data organization, that's why we were talking about the fact that you need to mimic the production data into your dev environment so that you can at least have the same behavior that you would have in production. That, I would say, one of the many FinOps tricks you can do.
Could you maybe walk us through? Let's think that I'm an e-commerce store, and then I do have dev, I do have a prod. What should I look at? I do have some clickstream data, I do have some user-based data. How can I ensure that this model drift and data drift is as small as possible?
So the first thing in this case is to start by prioritizing the metrics and the KPIs that is important for you. So for instance, in e-commerce, in this case, we know that latency is important, plus the clicks that you mentioned and the real-time response to the actions. For another use case, which would be latency not the priority, but it would be another thing. So if we take the e-commerce, I know that if I build in an e-commerce, I need to have a low latency because I don't want user to wait for 2 minutes for my answers. I want to have relevant recommendation because that's the main revenue growth I can achieve by recommending the appropriate information. So if we take that into consideration, I know that in my dev environment, I need to run some stress test that would overload my system. That's what we call stress testing by mimicking like 1 million requests at once and see how my model operate and behave. And second thing is, if we talk about the recommendation, I would need to take a subset of prod data and try to anonymize and make the corpus for training. And I mentioned anonymization because it's really important to not use the actual prod data because if we're in Europe, there is the GDPR and so on. So that's another topic, but try to anonymize all the data. And this is where you need to create an architecture or a data model that puts the data anonymized in another space and created the correlation between IP data, so personal data, and actual product data. Because if I want to do a recommendation, I don't really need to know the gender of this person or where it lives, but I just need to know the patterns and the behaviors of a person. If I think about it initially before starting my data model, it helps me think that, hey, maybe at some point I will need production data into my dev in order to make my solution better. So this is that kind of things you need to keep in mind before actually going into production.
Yeah. And it is also very interesting how you are highlighting the business priorities of the company and you're bringing that into considerations for what to actually do on the dev account. I really like it. And what I'm also thinking about is whether you have, well, let's call them fun exercises to model certain things when it comes to risks, when it comes to vulnerabilities, and when it comes to the aspects that could be covered by one of the dimensions of responsible AI. How do you put your customers into the position of, white hackers for them to think what can go wrong? Do you have a special hats that you're putting in so that they imagine malicious users or something like that?
You just described what red teaming is. So red teaming is a concept in security where you have a team where it behave as hackers and as malicious users that would like to break your system, and you have the blue team. Blue teams are, let's say, the good guys, and the red team as the bad guys. Easy as that. And this is something we do a lot with our customers and within the team, is try to reverse engineer how things could goes bad, because Murphy law, things will go bad. If things go bad, they will go. So this is what you try to see. Hey, which if at some point I have a DDoS attack, how can I mitigate that kind of risk? And this is where I'm starting to think maybe I can rely either on services that are provided by the public cloud services or some internal tools. Try to mitigate, know when to mitigate it and how. So this is where we try to create some we call them war rooms, where we put everyone on the same room and try to bring let's say, the best hacker's idea in order to break the system. Funny thing, we managed to find out that the teams are better in breaking things than building things, but that's another story. But you end up with kind of some solid system at the end of the road.
That is very interesting. That the people that are already very biased towards understanding how the things work can still find the ways of how to hack into them.
Indeed. If we talk about GenAI, I follow OSP top 10 for large language model. So OSP is actually a security project for open web application security projects. They release a ton of good practices. It's something I highly recommend. And they release the top 10 for GenAI and for large model applications. Cover prompt injection, model denial service. They cover data poisoning as well, supply chain. So it's actually an architecture that pinpoints each vulnerability of a GenAI stream. Kind of encourage the audience to give it a try and to check it.
That's for sure. That's for sure. And not just while reading the link that we will include into show notes, but actually gathering together with teammates and trying to arrange the hackathon around it. That would be very fun for everyone, I think.
That's true.
That is already the great tip for each and everyone who is listening. However, what I'm also thinking about is whether there is another strategy on, practical and cost-effective ways for company to future-proof the AI workloads that they are having. Maybe also with the view on the regulations that might be always changing.
That's a good question, because, as you mentioned, regulation change. We don't know what would be the next ChatGPT that would create some breakthrough into the IT world. And this is why it's really important to start always by the business value that I'm bringing to my end customers. Again, I'm talking about products here, but if we're talking about an IT product, that would be the same thing again. But it's really important to correlate between the models that I'm using and the value that I'm adding and then bringing to the end users. And this is really important to not create a hard dependency unless if it is strategically decided as such. But the best thing is to not create to decorrelate the two. And that's something we've seen like 10 years ago, 15 years ago through SOAP architectures, where you build your microservices, you try to decorrelate the data from data silo to data mesh and multi-domain data. So this is the same approach that we would create. And if we take, for instance, the use case of AI application, one pattern that is getting more traction now is multi-agent or agentic workflow, is the fact that I create many small agents that do specific tasks rather than one big agent that is, let's say, black box, and that if tomorrow the agent is not working, that would break everything. I would say by what we call in France, diviser pour régner. So it's the fact that you break down small pieces in order to control them better. And this is the same thing. So for instance, tomorrow, if you have an agent that deals with regulate, I know that the regulation will impact only this agent. And the worst case, I would say that I would have a down service on a specific agent rather than the whole workflow. By putting by reducing the impact zone or the impact radius of the regulation, I will be able to have a smooth transition from one technology to another. That's actually I would say, one of the ways to do it.
Yeah, divide and conquer.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
And actually, for the listeners who would like to tap into your expertise and reach out with the questions on how to comply with UAI Act, how to bring cost reduction to their TCOs, what are the good channels for you to be contacted at?
I would say LinkedIn.
All right, then
LinkedIn
I'm
is the best
including
one.
your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And I'm very much thanking you for the time that you have spent at AI Catch Up Podcast today.
Thank you, Alina, for having me today.
AI Catch Up brings the news.